This is a video for my higher classical studies class and for anyone else who happens to be here just as a tourist. This is the first of a series of videos, hopefully, and we'll cover a lot of the material that we've been through in class. Today I'm going to look at some of the background, not massively vital for higher classics, but I would argue essential to get an understanding of why we have the Roman Empire, where that came from. It'll take about 5 minutes anyway. So, Rome was, according to mythology, Rome was founded in 753 BCE by Romulus. Rome, he did give his name to his own settlement. The settlement was founded after a short argument with his brother Remus, which Remus famously and fatally lost. But if we look back at the mythology, we can see that Rome was actually founded indirectly by the Trojan hero Aeneas. This is a figure from Homer's Iliad in Greek mythology. And the Romans were very keen to attach themselves to this more ancient mythology, for reasons that we'll come on to in a later video. Suffice to say, for the time being, Aeneas, following the fall of Troy, through a very circuitous route, made his way to Italy, and subsequent to that, Romulus founded the settlement of Rome. It was based in Latium, modern-day Lazio. If you go to Rome, there is a part of Rome called Lazio where you will find the football team Manchester United. Of course you won't. You'll find the football team Lazio. And in Latium, the people who lived there were called Latins, and the language that they spoke was French. Hilarious. No, it was Latin. Rome was governed by kings to begin with. It was a monarchy, and it had 7 kings. The last of them was Tarquin the Proud, Tarquinius Superbus. Now, Tarquin's third son, according to mythology, was involved in the rape of a Roman noblewoman. And after this event, the Romans decided they could no longer tolerate one man having complete power, such as a king. And that becomes a really central facet of Roman identity for a long time and forms a complication later on when we get to the imperial age. Nonetheless, in 510 BCE, the Romans booted out Tarquin the Proud, and they set up a republic. A sort of democracy, in the sense that there were positions that were voted for, and they had a limited period of time. There was a change in the people who governed Rome, but it wasn't a democracy in the sense that we would recognize, because almost most of the people in Rome weren't allowed to vote. Foreigners, slaves, women, etc. However, the Republic was a sort of a democracy, and the Romans were very proud of that. But by the start of the 1st century BCE, the Republic had started to creak because, well, there were a lot of reasons, but the significant reason for me is there was an emergence of strong individual men. And these men, over time, accrued disproportionate amounts of power. We're not going to get into that now. We will get into it later, though. But by the middle of the 1st century BCE, these strong individual men were at war with each other, and consequently, Rome was at war with itself, and there were a number of civil wars. The Republic collapsed following the civil wars, and the last man standing was Octavian, who was then renamed Augustus, and he is our first emperor. Some people say that Julius Caesar was the first emperor, and you can make a case for it in some senses, but officially he is not the first emperor. Augustus is. Let's go into a little bit more detail going back over the way. Not loads. I'm going to try and keep this to a couple of minutes more. Over the first 500 years, Rome dominated, occasionally subjugated, stomped over, eliminated the other tribal settlements of Italy. And by 275 BCE, all of the Boot, that recognizable Boot, the peninsula of Italy, was Roman in one way or another. A lot of the other tribes, the Sabines, you decide, the Volscians, the Etruscans, were under Roman rule. Some of them were Roman allies, but they weren't allies in the sense that they got to participate and influence things. They effectively had to do what the Romans said. By 200 BCE, a lot of the previous 100 years had been spent at war with Carthage, a civilization across the Mediterranean in what we would nowadays call Tunisia. Carthage was originally established by Phoenician settlers. Phoenicia was further west along the Mediterranean in the Levant, or what we might, that kind of western end of the Mediterranean. Anyway, the settlers had travelled east and set up their own civilization in Carthage. The reason I mention the Phoenicians is because the Romans referred to these wars. There were 3 wars with Carthage, and they were called the Punic Wars. And people often wonder why Punic. Well, Punic is derived from the Roman for Phoenicia, these original settlements. So the Romans might have called it the wars with the Phoenicians. We would call it the wars with Carthage, but whether it's the Carthaginian Wars or the Punic Wars, it's the same thing. This is a long, long explanation for a very simple concept. I'm going to move on. By 200 BCE, the wars with Carthage were more or less finished. There was a third Punic War a little bit further into the 2nd century BCE, but Hannibal, the big name, was no longer rampaging around the Italian peninsula with his elephants. You've got me off the point again. Rome was by now in control of Sicily, Corsica, Sardinia, Carthage, parts of Spain. But these territories, rather than being allies working for Rome, they were actually governed by Roman men. Rome would set up its own government through these governors in these different provinces. And this was a model which was later rolled out as the Roman Empire expanded. And indeed, it did continue to expand into Greece, the civilization the Romans respected a great deal, and then latterly into Turkey, Syria, Egypt. And as we get into the 1st century BC, of course, Gaul, more of Turkey, maybe into further places to the east and to the north, parts of Africa as well. Anyway, the skinny. The core information, if you are making these little cue cards for exam revision, this is the basic stuff. Please add more. You don't get an A by writing the minimum. So this is useful just as a refresher, but I would expect you to take more notes than this. I don't want to go on about this, but you know for yourself. People who write more, people who study more, tend to perform better. Rome was founded 753 BCE. It was one of many towns. All the others seem to have been defeated by about 275 BCE. Rome was based in Latium. It was governed by a monarchy, then by a republic from 510 BCE until the 1st century when the republic gave way to imperial rule. Notice, imperial, emperor, yeah, that's connected. By 200 BCE, there was a Roman Empire to speak of, in the sense that there was Sicily, Corsica, Sardinia, Carthage, Spain. These places were ruled by Roman governors, and they were considered to be provinces. Rome then expanded further into Greece, into Turkey, Syria, Egypt, and so on, leading up to the conquests of Pompey and Julius Caesar, and so on and so on and so on. If you have any questions about this, see me in class or keep them to yourselves. I'm not looking for any extra work.